Could you tell everybody about mindfulness and what you see its role might be, or in OCD? Because people will ask about ACT and mindfulness and those types of things. So I'd be interested your take on that.
My attitude is that the mindfulness for OCD is not separate from mindfulness for everything else. As I mentioned before, the retreat here at Shepherd Pratt is a general psychiatric program that has an OCD a program within it. And so when I'm running the mindfulness group here, for example, I'll be speaking to a group of people, some of whom have OCD, some of whom have trauma or substance use issues or other types of issues. And I'm not modifying the message all that much for any of those different conditions, because what we're talking about here is suffering, and suffering is being caused by being lost in thought about the past or the future. And so you're thinking, something bad happened. I can't stand it. I don't like it. I wish it hadn't happened. Or maybe it happened in case of OCD. Could it have had happened? I'm not sure. Right. So that's not you actually showing up to be alive here on earth, present. So mindfulness is not an intervention. It's not something you do. It's a perspective you take in which you show up to the present moment exactly the way it is, without judgment and without thinking like, okay, this really needs to be changed. It's really just looking at things the way they are, like having the experience. So you might be immersed in the past, I shouldn't have touched that thing or looked at that thing or had that thought. Or you might be immersed in the future. This thing's going to happen. What if it happens? I'm afraid of the next thing, a disappointment coming up. And all of those things, when you're sort of inside them and you're not realizing, hey, I'm just thinking here, but you actually feel like you're in the movie, that's where a lot of your suffering is coming from. What makes OCD, the greater challenge than some other conditions in this regard is that when you become aware that you're lost in thought, it's very hard to just sort of drop it and come back to the present. You usually feel like there's something you have to do, like you're contractually obligated to figure it out or repeat the thing or get that reassurance. And then you're sort of allowed to return your attention to it. So you can imagine somebody who's like just, relaxing and watching TV, and something happens in the show that triggers them. And then they start to think about it. Why did it trigger me? What does it mean? What's it going to happen? Whatever. And they don't even know that that's happened. They still think they're watching TV, but actually their mind has completely left the project to follow the story and is now following its own story. And then they become aware, like, oh, I'm obsessing. And to be able to just be like, yeah, I'm not going to do that right now and go back to watching the show, that would be wonderful. But what tends to happen is something along the lines of, let me figure out my sexual orientation in this moment. Let me make sure I didn't actually want to hurt anybody or whatever the obsession might be. Further digging, kind of digging you into this process of being somewhere other than here, right? Meanwhile, you're getting older, right? So you're sort of missing out on being alive. And where we get a lot of our joy from isn't positive experiences or happy things or exciting things. Those are great, but we get a lot of our joy from just sort of being around when something joyful happens, when you're just sort of minding your own business and then you see a hummingbird and you're like, wow, that bird flies really weird, right? And like, wow, that's great. People miss out on so many of those moments because they're lost in thought. So long-winded way of basically saying, if you could pay more attention to where your mind is and enhance your ability to bring it back to the present more objectively, you'll find that your life is a lot easier to manage. But what in so doing, you have to only take the risk, and this is where exposure therapy comes in, of letting it go when maybe there's some sense of moral urgency to spend more time with it, to figure it out, right? Maybe I let this thought go too quickly. Maybe I decided to let myself watch this show instead of try to figure out why I got triggered. And that feels like a moral quandary for a lot of people with OCD. Like, who am I to decide that this is just OCD? This is the battle with most OCD, right? Because if everybody could just be like, yeah, whatever, it's OCD and let it go, then nobody would need any additional help, right?
Right. Which is also why we don't use that as part of treatment. Just tell yourself it's your OCD, because if that worked, well, then no one would have OCD.
Right. Have you tried stopping it, for example?
Yes, right.
Yeah. So mindfulness has been very, unlike OCD, mindfulness has been very good to me. And initially I learned about it in a very kind of intellectual way, you meditate and feel better and relax or whatever. But once I started going to actual meditation retreats and spending a lot of time really kind of training myself to pay attention in that specific way, and I'm not saying this is for everyone or that everyone should do it, but for me, there was definitely a process of clouds opening up that really helped me to understand the difference between a narrative in my head and just an experience of my senses and my mental objects. And so it's been very helpful for me. And I try to pass this on to as many people as I can.